We're all techies here. So, in an environment that has a mecca of creativity, all night coding sessions, and computers rapidly making human labor obsolete, where do we currently stand when it comes to managing mental health in the fast paced world of tech?
I don't know about you guys. I've definitely had a breakdown in like my tech career multiple times. At the same time, though, it's an interesting balance where a lot of tech companies strive to provide a work-life balance now, or access to resources and sessions on mental health. And I don't think the same can be said for a lot of other industries. But whether or not people are making use of all of those resources, or those resources even solve the root causes of the burnout.
Yeah, I think this is beyond just tech as a vertical industry, right? I think it is culture in technology teams. And like as soon as that becomes part of the culture and the expectation, then you start seeing things like heroics get rewarded over people who are just trying to do the regular old job, right? It puts more pressure on everybody to keep producing more and more. Meanwhile, like burnout is just going out of control around the world in tech jobs.
I remember a few weeks ago we were talking about Elon Musk asking people to stay around the clock. Some people were sleeping at the Twitter office during that whole fiasco. He was asking people to be hardcore, setting that tone at the top. Propagates to every department.
Yeah. You both have touched on, Kevin and Joyce here, on productivity culture and the things that we choose to reward. Joyce, you just mentioned how we set the tone and what we expect from folks. I think that's what this all kind of boils down to, right? Our burnout can be attributed to the things that we reward at our companies and our cultures. If you're rewarding somebody for working long weekends because they struck that deal finally that we've been working on for so long, rather than giving them their accolades for doing this amazing thing, I think a conversation should also happen with that person and let them know, yes, you did this awesome thing, but next time let's think about how we can do that within a reasonable time frame during work hours. Like, how can I support you as a leader to get that done when, it should be during a reasonable time? I feel like those conversations aren't happening and aren't being pushed as much these days.
I think that there's an issue with founders, especially. So when I think about tech, I think a lot about startups as well. But even when you go up to large enterprises, they start getting conscious about creating and saving money in as many ways as possible with the least amount of work or impact on their bottom line. Founders are taking millions and millions of dollars in funding and promising faster and faster turnarounds and returns on that funding back to investors. Big companies are worried about little companies taking over their markets, and there's so much fear and competition in the market. It's so hard for me to see people actually asking any employee to slow down until they see the impact of that on their workforce as a whole. But I don't think I've ever heard anyone say work slower or at a more reasonable pace in my career so far. It's always work more.
I've heard a lot of companies be proactive. I'm not sure if it accomplishes it, but to me, I've heard some companies require their employees to take the vacation that they're allotted.
Yeah.
You have to take that vacation. I've heard some switch their scheduling to 4/10s, saying take every Friday off, but work longer during the week, but then take every Friday off. Or have actually it's been enforced, mandatory days to spend and do whatever you want, anything but work.
I think one difficult aspect of this is that it requires a certain amount of self-awareness and disconnecting from that culture that tells you to keep producing and producing. I've been through burnout several times throughout my tech career. I was recently having a conversation with my therapist, actually, and I said, hey, I think I'm approaching burnout again. My therapist said, Kevin, you've been in burnout for the last 3 years, right? So there's even an element of saying, I'm so used to being exhausted and just at my wit's end that it becomes the new normal. And when it's your normal, you don't even notice that you're a fish breathing the water, right? Like it's just all around you. So it almost requires our leaders in tech and our peers in tech to say, hey, I think maybe you do need to slow down, right? Hey, I noticed you've been putting in a lot more work. I noticed that you're working late nights. I think being mindful of the culture requires us to actively work against it and take care of our folks.
And as a hiring manager, I used to ask people questions about, what do you do in your spare time? Do you have any side projects? Are you hacking on any kind of projects? In my mind, I was asking this because if somebody's really passionate about tech or development or like whatever it is, you're like putzing around doing these kind of side quests. But I think that is also an unhealthy expectation to have. Some people want to have a well-paying job and take care of their families and then go home and then live actual life. And so having that separation and getting rid of that expectation that people are spending nights and weekends on hobby projects is something that I've corrected in myself.
That is something that I've heard a lot of, actually, and a lot of folks asking about is, what are those side projects? How are you professionally developing outside of work? I think that puts on this like implied pressure as well that you were touching on there, Joyce. That was something that I hadn't actually thought about until you brought it up right now.
And I'm a manager too, and I am very conscious of when I say I'm taking vacation, I try dang hard to not be checking into email, not be responding to Slack, because I think that just sets a poor example for anybody. Even if I tell them, hey, it's okay, please take this time off, I don't want to see you checking in. If they see me doing it, then it's, I don't know.
Part of it, yeah, is like the modeling from our leaders. Are they taking that vacation? Are they actually tuning out? Like, we see them and we know that they're setting that tone for us, to use that word again. And then also, I think there's a responsibility on leaders to make sure and keep track of the time off that folks are taking. Joyce, you mentioned before that some folks try to ensure that they're taking all of their time off. But I think in addition to that, or on top of that, you can see we have like unlimited PTO at Postman, for example. How much of that are you taking advantage of per month, per week? That's something you can check in on with somebody.
Companies that have unlimited PTO typically have people take less vacation. That's the stat behind that.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it too. No one's really checking in on it.
But Kevin, you mentioned burnout, which I think is just like rampant in tech. And there still is a stigma around talking about mental health. So Kevin, you talking about burnout and talking about your therapist and talking about your struggles is huge. One organization that I've heard about is Open Source Mental Health, specifically for tech, with resources geared towards developers and other folks with technical roles. Just even talking about it and then making it a little bit more okay is still not widespread. If you talk about burnout, then maybe you're perceived as weak or not hardcore.
I guess I won't be working at Twitter because I admitted to having burnout. Yeah, I don't know. I think we need more honesty in the industry, right? And I think for a lot of people recently who have gone through all these tech layoffs, they're just realizing like, oh, I've been burned out. It took me getting laid off to realize that I'm no longer in that environment anymore. And perhaps I wasn't doing the best for my own mental health. Hopefully it doesn't take such a big event for everyone else to get that awareness. But it is definitely something I think we do need to keep paying attention to moving forward.